This is an unofficial video supporting Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada. Hello my fellow Canadians. Thank you for taking the time to view this series of videos in order to gain understanding and better information so you may best cast your ballot this October for the sake of Canada today and onwards into the future. I apologize for this initial video's length, but the information provided takes some time to put together. All preceding videos will be much shorter so they may be easier to get through. I also really wish the first video in this series was of a lighter note, focusing on the greatness of the People's Party of Canada and its leader Maxime Bernier, but unfortunately this material is just too important. Canadians need to see it. If you were at a beautiful birthday celebration for the friend of a friend whom you did not know and a fire broke out in their home and flames were quickly engulfing everything, would you stop to get to know this wonderful person whose birthday it is? Or would you first get out of the house? Obviously you would do what is more pressing and then return to the pleasantries later. That's precisely what we're doing right now, focusing on the most pressing matter first in regards to Canada's future, and in later videos, we'll talk about the excellent platform of the People's Party of Canada. This is not alarmism. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is thoroughly investigated, documented, and true. Before we begin, we need to define two terms, Muslim and Islamist or Islamist. A Muslim is a follower of the religion of Islam, so someone who believes in Allah and prescribes to the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad, I think we could fairly say. An Islamist, however, is an advocate or supporter of Islamic militancy or fundamentalism. These are radical Islamists. So in other words, the ideology that Islam should be promoted politically, not just locally, but globally. That being said, please, I urge you not to let fear overwhelm you and cause you to treat our fellow Canadians who are Muslim with unkindness. Continue to embrace them as you already do, as the majority of Muslims in Canada are not Islamists. Love and acceptance in relationship is also the greatest weapon against moderate Muslims being deceived into the belief in Islamism, as well as the greatest weapon to free anyone living as an Islamist already. We aren't their enemy. They don't need to subdue us in Islam or take over our Western nation to subdue it to Islam either, and love will be what proves this. Now let's begin. July 15th, Tom Quiggin of the Quiggin Report posted a 2-minute-long teaser trailer at minds.com of a video exposing Andrew Scheer, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, intimately associating with or pandering to, or perhaps even courting, Salafists. The Salafi movement within Islam is an Islamist movement accused of being linked to violent extremism, with copious amounts of evidence. But who is Tom Quiggin? Is he credible? Let's have a listen.
Tom Quiggin is a counter-terrorism and national security expert with over 30 years of practical intelligence and military experience. A former senior fellow at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, he has 30-plus years of practical intelligence experience in a variety of positions, including the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Bank of Canada, Canadian Armed Forces, United Nations Protection Force in Yugoslavia, Citizenship and Immigration Canada, War Crimes, International War Crimes Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, The Hague, Privy Council Office of Canada, and in addition, Tom was a qualified arms control inspector for the conventional forces in the Europe Treaty and the Vienna Document. Thomas Quiggin is a court-qualified expert on terrorism, the criminal court and the federal court, and intelligence collection as evidence. Considered one of the leading experts in his field, Tom Quiggin has testified on multiple occasions to the Canadian Senate, the Canadian House of Commons committees, as well as the Royal Commission Air India inquiry of 2007, and provided testimony to the Special Senate Committee on Anti-Terrorism in 2010, and if you can believe it, much, much more.
Episode number 25 of the Quiggin Report is a 50-minute biographical interview with Tom. Not only does it discuss his career, but also important election topics like polling bias and the sophisticated corruption within governments such as ours. Another bio along with 18 articles by Tom can be found at the Gatestone Institute's online archives. Clearly, he's no slouch, friends. As promised by the teaser, the video titled Political Entryism, Rise of the Islamist would be uploaded August 11th to a lesser-known media platform called BitChute. Don't mind the ominous music when you watch it. I know it's melodramatic, but the topic is, of course, rather ominous. The video goes through the steps Islamists implement within the host society in order to subvert it and change it from the inside out, turning it into their vision of what society should be. One of those steps is to conflate Islam with Islamism by causing this distracting confusion adopted by the masses. When someone questions the validity or even the obvious danger of Islamism, their speech can quickly be shut down as Islamophobia and hate speech, censoring them from sharing their concerns and alerting others. At the same time, when people are seen to support Islam, they can be used as pawns by Islamists to validate Islamism, which maneuvers so subtly. One of the Islamists in the video is Omar Subedar, an imam with the Canadian Council of Muslim Theologians. He unfortunately published an article about Muslim men being permitted to strike their wives correctively when they're disobedient. He was seen in the first image in light clothing standing to the left of Andrew Scheer. And why is it that only rebel media is talking about this? And why are they deemed not worthy of our attention, even being banned from the CPC convention in 2018? It's because they're one of the only news outlets brazen or daring enough to discuss these matters. And as you'll soon learn, Scheer does not want optics that look Islamophobic. Link in the description below. But the leader of the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier, had no problem mentioning it here in his tweet. Also, just as domestic violence towards a spouse for any reason is not correct, how is it justifiable to physically discipline your wife if she behaves in a way that is interpreted from the Quran as incorrect? Sounds like domestic abuse to me. For anyone curious, this is diametrically opposed to the New Testament from the Bible, which reads, "In the same way husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church." If you don't strike your own body, friends, you obviously can't strike your spouse's body. Thankfully, this is not the view of all Muslim men. I also do not believe most sensible Canadians would want visiting imams teaching within Canada that homosexuals are to be punished by death, unless of course they leave homosexuality, as we heard in the video on entryism. But that begs the question, what do you do if they continue in their homosexuality and the interpretation is that they should truly be stoned to death if gay? Well, what did they do in Islamist nations? We'll discuss that shortly. The video also points back to an article from 2017 divulging that 2 Islamic organizations in Canada lost their charitable status for moving their funds overseas to fund Pakistani jihadis. It really must be watched in completion to help you vote to keep Canada free. Defendants of Scheer argue that he was just posing for a picture. But as you saw, this was a sit-down meal, and definitely not a spur-of-the-moment ordeal. Then they argue he wouldn't have known who they were. But his staff would surely have vetted people he would so closely associate with due to public opinion in such a tight race with the Liberal Party. In Scheer's defense, he's definitely being diplomatic at points. For example, fairness in checking charities and ensuring claims of extremism are properly investigated. But still, why meet these people when there are many other mosques and many other Muslims? You'll soon see none of this was a mere accident by chance. It's all far, far worse. One godless woman, a former Muslim herself, who fled her Islamist country and now resides in Canada and makes videos warning us for our good and for the safety of people like her, tells us exactly who these men are based on their dress code in a video titled "Dress Code Signaling, Menswear." It explains that these men are dressed just like the dangerous Islamist Salafists we've already mentioned are extreme and violent. But it goes deeper. Alongside the upload of the entryism video, a document was linked to it in the video's description. What's most concerning is the 3 gentlemen seated closest to Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer are his Member of Parliament candidates from the area. They are the very individuals being maneuvered into our government by a malevolent foreign intelligence agency. The document begins with an excerpt from a submission to an intelligence journal by Sean P. Winchell regarding the Pakistani ISI, or Inter-Service Intelligence, their intelligence organization, and their link to terrorism in order to advance the Islamist cause. And the International Journal of Intelligence and Counterintelligence that Winchell wrote in is a reputable source. I own a book called Descent into Chaos by Ahmed Rashid, so I remembered hearing about the Pakistani ISI aiding Taliban, which enabled me to find the following. One of the most astonishing vignettes told by Rashid is dubbed The Great Escape. It occurred on November 15, 2001, when there was an imposed lull in the fighting at Kunduz, so that Pakistani planes could fly in and evacuate members of the ISI and untold number of Taliban to Pakistan, thwarting the efforts of the United States and the Northern Alliance in the very early days of the ground combat in Afghanistan post 9/11. That war would have been finished in 2 months had this not been permitted. The document also refers to a significant bombing to Kabul embassies, but cites an article that doesn't refer directly to the Canadian embassy at all, but to the German embassy where the blast occurred. But a global TV article referring to the same incident indicates our Canadian embassy in Afghanistan also suffered significant damage. Pakistani ISI are named in the BBC article as the perpetrators of the attack. If Pakistani ISI are the good guys, why are they helping the Taliban and bombing German and Canadian embassies and killing hundreds of Afghani civilians? With an understanding of how much of a threat Pakistani ISI are, let's look at the summaries of persons of interest within the leaked document. Conservative Senator Salma Adhalajan, linked to Pakistani intelligence. Ishaq Mohammed, CPC member and close associate to Andrew Scheer, alleged ties to Pakistani ISI. Iftikhar Chaudhry, MP candidate for CPC, ties to Pakistani ISI, said to have an undeclared second wife. Irshad Chaudhry, close ally and friend of Islamist liberal MP Salma Saeed, who has strong ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. Irshad was advised by her to become the CPC candidate to beat him or lose to him to ensure control over the area was maintained. Zia Chaudhry, CPC candidate and linked with Danforth Mienda Mosque, one of the most extremist mosques in Ontario, linked to Pakistani ISI. Omar Al-Gabra is a Liberal MP and lobbied for Sharia law courts in Canada. CPC candidate recruiter Jeff Trin was alerted to the maneuvers of others to get ISI-linked Pakistani candidates into the CPC as MP candidates. He did not care. Dustin Van Voot, executive director of the CPC, is also complicit with this. You'll notice as we go through this series of videos that Dustin Van Voot is always very close to the corruption. It would seem if it smells, he was probably behind it. Sadly, members of this Islamist Pakistani group are said to threaten, surveil, and intimidate other members of the Canadian Pakistani community.
All major politicians want to distance.
Tahir, you spoke about religion.
Right.
You see, this is the whole point. Religion has to be taken out of politics. I thought that we were coming to a country where there is separation of church and state, there is separation of mosque and state, and that is one of the values of Muslims facing tomorrow, is to work, your religion should be your private affair. But these politicians, these people who have been elected, who come from a certain faith, keep on throwing the religion into the mix. They constantly keep on bringing it into the mix. Keep your religion at home and then care for public and Canadian values and Canadians of all ilks, faith and no faith.
They have to realize that
actually with these type of things, we are actually ghettoizing. We are giving the power into the hands of certain people who want to play it against the will of so many people who are innocent and who deserve to live a better life. Yes, Sohail, what would you like to comment?
What I was trying to say is that these kind of politicians, I won't even call them politicians, these are the person who is a gangster in his neighborhood. These kind of people become politicians because they promise a certain vote bank that they snatch out of mosques or other unscrupulous religious organizations. These that is why the mainstream politicians avoid them. They think, okay, he's bought 400 votes. If you ask me, I'll bring 4 votes. But these guys bring 400 votes, and they blackmail the mainstream community into saying, if you go against our will, well, you'll just lose so much of the vote bank. So whether it's the Khalistani movement, whether it's the Pakistani politicians, whether it's the Sri Lankan Tamil community, we have all been blackmailed by the ethnic vote bank for our own unscrupulous reasons.
If Canada is in trouble, we are all in trouble. We don't have to only enjoy the prosperity, we have to see all the difficulties with that. With these words, thank you very much for watching TAG TV News and Views Bulletin today.
Imagine settling in Canada thankful to, so you think, never be intimidated by people like those you fled from ever again. And they end up being your neighbors. All for the sake of getting you to vote for their agenda. I should add that one of the women in that panel was Raheel Raza, a speaker and contributor to the Clarion Project, a watchdog resource to combat radical Islamism. It's worth signing up for their email updates to stay informed. CPC headquarters was warned that the document would be leaked if they did not clean their house. They did not act, likely out of fear or out of apathy in a desire to garner a voter demographic. The irony again is most Muslims came to Canada for freedom, leaving extremism in hopes for good. July 31st, you can see Tom tweets to Andrew Scheer, who is inactive on this issue. Indeed, Tom had been warning them for months. August 11th, the time was up, and he put out the video on entryism by extremists infiltrating and subverting the CPC, along with the online document we've been viewing. Link in the description. Please read and share. Wanting to confirm Tom Quiggin had prepared the document, I searched for the Google Docs link on Google and found an archived 4chan thread discussing the contents. Then I thought to try and look at the document details. The document indeed was put out August 11th by QuigginReport@gmail.com. Security analyst and intelligence expert on terrorism, Tom Quiggin was indeed the one who put this all together and demanded action. It's even possible Quiggin himself put the details of the document on 4chan August 12th as a backup, as well as for more exposure. There's even more to come this election cycle as Tom gets ready to release what are being called the Qatar Papers, presumably linking funding from foreign Islamist nations of the Muslim Brotherhood to Canadian political parties, primarily the Liberals and Conservatives. The document already said sources from the Muslim community are working as informants for Tom. When I was serving overseas in Kabul, Afghanistan back in 2003 to 2004, everybody became aware that someone, probably in the TOC or Tactical Operations Center, was selling information to news reporters. Nothing too sensitive, but this is still immoral. Sometimes, though, someone in the military leaks something, not for monetary gain, but because people should know and the government has no business hiding it. Then it's the right thing to do. If there are few patriots within the RCMP's intelligence or in CSIS, the Canadian Security and Intelligence Services, who are friends with Tom, and it would be a community like any trade develops a community, it's possible someone has leaked information to him because they are tired of the muzzle put on them by the Liberals and weary of what they see accompanying the Conservatives. I suspect former friends and colleagues still in the intelligence gathering business might be dropping Tom the occasional fact or piece of information, even a subtle, "You ever hear of a guy named ... which Tom then follows up on. I could be wrong, though, as this is just speculation. It's also critical to understand he'd already warned all the members of Parliament from every party with his book, but their policies tell us they will do nothing about this. For Tom's efforts in uncovering such corruption, here's his reward, a lawsuit meant to silence him, which he must raise money to battle. All of this explains why Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party rejected Salim Mansour. Who is Salim Mansour? Professor Emeritus with a doctorate in political science at Western Ontario University, member of Canadian Conservative Party and then as well as the Alliance Party for over 30 years, came from Calcutta to Toronto and started as a cab driver. He's also himself a Muslim. Been an academic consultant for the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., consultant for CIDA, which is the Canadian International Development Agency, published widely in academic journals on foreign policy matters and various studies of the Middle East and South Asia. This is the very sort of successful immigrant story a major political party would want to put forward to the public. You can hear much more about him in the SoundCloud episode number 11, Political Assassination, Salim Mansour, cited earlier while reviewing Tom Quiggan's credentials. But Dr. Mansour is very vocal in his speech against political Islamism, even writing books. The Quran Problem and Islamism, 2017, Delectable Lie, A Liberal Repudiation of Multiculturalism, 2011, and Islam's Predicament, Perspectives of a Dissident Muslim, 2009. He was attacked in his own Muslim community after writing articles that condemned the actions of the Taliban. He had to stop attending his own mosque, and 2 fatwas were put on his life. Yes, all while in Canada. He denounced candidacy for the Conservative Party in August 2018 in London North Centre riding. In November, he was approved to launch campaign preparations, and his papers were in order. He had many Conservative endorsements on his page. He's since had to remove 2 who were former Progressive Conservatives. Ask yourself why someone so talented didn't receive endorsements from more recent members of the Conservative Party of Canada. It should be obvious why not now. But June 10, 2019, after 8 months of silence, he was told via email that his candidacy was disallowed, no reasons given. He was told he could appeal. He did 5 days later on the 15th of June. But then he was told there's only 24 hours to launch an appeal, so his appeal had been too late. On the 20th of June, the CPC announced a nomination race in that riding, only allowing a window of several days for application. In the end, he was removed and replaced by a parachute candidate, Sarah Bakari, considered, quote, a safe Muslim, unquote, from Brampton by the CPC. So why remove him? This is all due to Mansour's stance against Islamists who believe an Islamic political system should rule over all people and non-Muslims should be forced into submission. Mansour is diametrically opposed to these individuals, and it would have caused a rift in the party that would have surely been noticed by the media and the voters, staining the party. The largest organization pushing this agenda is the Muslim Brotherhood, operating in 81 countries. Was Salim's removal thanks to the influence of extremists in Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who are members of the Muslim Brotherhood? The global Islamist agenda is funded by Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Mansour has identified political Islam as a major threat to Western democracies, as many others have too. He's gone far enough to differentiate religious Islam from political Islam. In episode 11 of the Quiggan Report, Tom surmised that Salim was removed because he is a direct threat to Qatar and Saudi Arabia's funding meant to infiltrate our Canadian government. Why would the CPC go along with this?
And finally, on inquiries and silences, word came down that my writings, my public position, and who I am makes me an Islamophobe, and the party doesn't want to have anything to do with me because I am Islamophobic, and that will stain the record or will damage the party during the election campaign. I would be disruptive.
This has a lot of the Conservative Party and Scheer's fear of the mainstream media calling them Islamophobic, and Trudeau being able to call them this as well. This is their claim for letting Salim go. Even though any attack of Islamophobia in the Conservative Party would be overrunning a popular moderate Canadian Muslim. You don't need to defend against such attacks. Therefore, their surface explanation makes no sense. Maxime Bernier retweets a reporter who's upset that the CPC won't support moderate Muslims who speak against radicals. Well, no doubt. I highly recommend listening to the 2-part video series I've cited here of Dr. Mansour discussing his entire situation shortly before joining the People's Party of Canada, as well as the Islamization of Western nations and the threat of globalism, which most Canadians assume bears no threat at all. Many of the details he believes revolve around his disallowance from the Conservative Party are quite unsettling. The total runtime is 1 hour and 15 minutes. Links in description below.
That the NCCM, formerly known as CARE Canada, better known as Hamas, properly should be known as Hamas, that they had influenced the Conservative Party to drop your nomination. I hope I have that right. Could you speak just for a minute or so on how much influence Hamas/CARE Canada/NCCM has on the Conservative Party of Canada?
Well, it is the fear more than the direct influence, and fear then opens up all the other possibilities. Once you demonstrate your weakness, then it becomes a matter of extortion, you know. So in my case, I was making inferences. I said in my remarks, there is no paper trail. So anyone asking this question will not only be denied, but anybody suggesting that will be saying you're engaged in conspiracy theory.
So the National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM, formerly CARE Canada, or Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE having been linked to Hamas, likely intimidated the CPC to drop Mansour's nomination. So how much influence do they have on the CPC? Yes, that's Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Lisa Raitt. And who is NCCM or CARE for that matter? A 7-minute video titled, "Why is the Conservative Party Pandering to Radical Islamist Organizations?" will tell you, and there is a link in the description. Mansour also divulges via anecdotal evidence that the Liberal MP of Mississauga, Aaron Mills, was a member of the MSA, Muslim Students Association, while in school, and that has links to the Muslim Brotherhood as well, and may very well mean she is also an Islamist. Looking at her photo, she seems like a nice, normal lady. I happened to mention her to someone who lives in her riding, and here's what that looked like on Facebook. Your MP in Aaron Mills, Ikra Khalid, is believed by Mansour to be an Islamist. She's a Brotherhood disciple just like Omar Agabra. Our mayor is bought and paid for by Mohammed Faki, owner of Paramount Fine Foods. By the way, he was just given a 20-year lease on the Hershey Center by her. It's beyond crazy. It's overtly criminal now. I will be moving out of the GTA shortly. This area is lost. Is everything they said true? I don't know, but it seems to fit. This also explains why Andrew Scheer silenced MP Michael Cooper for defending the right of conservative commentators to speak freely on the internet. Scheer had him removed from the Justice Committee on the Human Rights Act's Section 13 concerning online hate speech being a crime, obviously to appease the tiny Islamist Muslim voter base who don't care to differentiate between Islamophobia and defense of free speech, because free speech criticizing their agenda and revealing it to the world may very well stop what they're doing. We'll be discussing MP Cooper's removal in a greater detail in a later video. It's also why Scheer has adopted the UN's definition for prioritizing refugees in their migrant compact. I know everyone will tell you the Conservative Party is firm on getting us out of the UN Migrant Compact, which dictates to our nation how we are to handle any international refugee situations and whom we're to let in. But the CPC were saying that nearly a year ago. And looking at their own documents, it's clear it still has an influence. And now that we're nearing elections, they don't want to offend anyone. So why did the Conservative Party of Canada side with extremist Islamists intent on subverting Canadian politics in an attempt to alter the country while gaining favor for the Pakistani ISI? Is this really to capture voting blocks of Muslims? They're extremists that are being courted and don't even make up the largest voting bloc. This is the most innocent of conclusions, but it's likely far worse. Truthfully, it makes no sense to appease these radicals for so small a number of votes in exchange for the votes of the vast number of moderate Muslims. That leads me to believe there must be more enticing the CPC. As it turns out, Andrew Scheer, like Justin Trudeau, is also pursuing a seat on the UN Security Council, and the nations of the Muslim Brotherhood within the United Nations may be agreeing to endorse Canada in exchange for what they're getting to do here. Could it also be to gain favor with Saudi Arabia? Is there even more involved? Is it in hopes of having the Muslim Brotherhood sway support from the Liberal Party to the Conservative Party?
Among the threats to our values and way of life is political Islam, or Islamism, the fastest growing and most dangerous radical ideology in the world today, which is responsible for so much violence in so many countries. There is growing evidence that Islamists are pushing their agenda here in Canada with the support of money coming from Middle East. One of the main critics of Islamism in Canada is our star candidate, Professor Salim Mansour.
Bernier says it at the rally. We know money is funding radicalism in Canada and in other parties. This is why I'm so thankful the People's Party of Canada has a slogan of, quote, doing politics differently, end quote. Because the idea of allowing unethical practices to occur because you think you'll receive something good in return is the epitome of evil to me when it concerns politics. I am done with those sorts of unethical business practices in government. But there's more that should be concerning us.
Islamism, or political Islam, as an ideology and a political movement, and not the religion of Islam as a personal faith of hundreds of millions of people, including mine, is driven by the objective of enforcing global Sharia compliance by any means available. Islamism is contrary to the cultural values and political ideas of Western liberal democracy.
Here's another testimony from a woman who grew up under Sharia in Iran. Link in the description below. So what is multiculturalism?
When it comes to defining multiculturalism, yes, multiculturalism is a blend of cultures, but it does not mean that you eat my samosa and I'm not going to eat your burger. It's all-way traffic. It's not like that you celebrate my culture and I will not celebrate your culture.
Most Canadians have attended an international food festival where we share and enjoy each other's cultural foods. This idea of sharing is what multiculturalism is meant to be about. And no, it's not cultural appropriation to enjoy the food of other people. That's ridiculous. But imagine someone walking up to you and asking you to try their green jello. You kindly oblige, but it's not to your liking. But they tell you to eat more. You don't want to. So now they go get the police. And soon you're before a human rights tribunal. You'll hear later in this series that these tribunals are a total farce in regards to justice and freedom. My point is, that is not what multiculturalism is supposed to be about.
A lot of people believe that Western states in general are under threat, and that threat comes from globalization and perhaps more importantly comes from radical Islam, which is spreading around the globe. The President of France, for instance, Mr. Macron, says that the French Republic is threatened because political Islam wants to secede from France. His head of intelligence says that in France they're afraid of a civil war if the terrorist attacks from the Islamists continue, and the Minister of the Interior in France stated publicly that many parts of the French Republic are no longer under French control, neighborhoods under control of drug dealers and radical Islamists. Next door in Germany we see much the same situation. The German Federal Intelligence Service has said the recent spike in anti-Semitism, or anti-Jewish hatred if you prefer that term, is not coming from the extreme right, it's coming from the Islamists. And no lesser a soul herself than the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has come right out and said there are no-go zones in Germany, and these no-go zones are occurring because of criminality and because of extremist Islam. Folks tend to forget that Angela Merkel, herself a darling of the progressive left, has said on the public record that she is not in favor of multiculturalism because it is proven to be a failure in Germany. And she says the problem with multiculturalism, it creates parallel societies which are then not manageable.
Some want to believe allowing Syrian refugees into Europe en masse was out of the goodness of their hearts. Others say this was done in hopes of bringing in a lot of very cheap labor to stimulate the economy. In either case, this was a failed social experiment. We now have no-go zones all over these developed Western nations. Grenade attacks all over Sweden. Yes, attacks with grenades, over 100 of them. That's not normal. Sanctioned Sharia courts operating within Britain.
Given your policies on migration and multiculturalism, what sort of issues drive you? What's most important to you? And why are you talking about these things when other parties don't even seem to want to talk about these issues?
because it is too important for the future of our country. And you're right when you said that multiculturalism failed in Europe and in Canada also. Now what we're doing in this country, we celebrate every diversity and ethnicity, and that must not be that. We must celebrate what unites us.
What will help is proper funding, enabling of RCMP and CSIS so they aren't hamstrung like with current parties who want these things to go forward. In Canada, you are free. If you want to take off a head covering while you exercise at the gym, Sharia police should not be able to fine you. If you want to join a rock band or walk away from Islam or convert, no one should be able to stop you. You want to improve your lap times while swimming by using a one-piece rather than a bikini? Nobody should be able to say no. I appreciate modesty myself, but I'm not going to oppress people through laws provided they're not indecently exposing themselves. This Muslim woman who tweeted agrees with me.
يعني رسالة دل دربها حق الناس المستشرفة سواء النساء ولا الرجال. يا أمي ألبس حجاب ما ألبس حجاب مو شغلك. ألبس مايو أفسخ أمشي بفسخة هم مو شغلك. أنت شغلك نفسك ما راح تنام بقبري. بعدين حبيبي إذا الحجاب عاجبك لبسه. ليش مو
Whether or not you agree with their practices, gay and transgender people should be safe too. The acid attacks were in the UK, by the way.
Let me be very clear about one thing. All cultures are not equal. In the culture where my daughter, who's autistic, gets the highest respect of the state and the citizenry, is a superior culture than a culture that says autistic children are a curse on society. The culture that says I need blade marks on my face to identify my tribe is inferior to the culture that says you and I are citizens of a country based on a constitution, not the color of our skin. Had this been multiracialism, I would have celebrated it. Multiculturalism is a curse because it lowers every culture to the lowest common denominator, whether it is female genital mutilation as part of the culture.
One godless woman who left Islam talks about her experience in coming to Canada and also says Sheer wants to begin a particular medical training program she'd participated in. She'd been raped while in training, totally dismissed, and pledges to oppose entryism into Canada. What about these children in Philadelphia? They didn't make these poems and songs up themselves. If they did, why didn't anyone stop them? Or why are they thinking this way in the first place? Link in description below. Having been in the Canadian Forces for nearly 5 years, I got to see some of these abhorrent cultural practices firsthand while on tour to Afghanistan. Before leaving, we were at a cultural briefing where a Canadian who'd emigrated from Afghanistan briefed us on what to expect, warning us that even though it may make us uncomfortable, it's part of their culture and we were instructed by our chain of command not to intervene. He focused on two things specifically: men beating their wives and pederasty, the practice of older men having a young boy as a companion that accompanied them around and whom they would sexually assault. We couldn't do anything about that. We weren't alone, as you see. It was going on to American soldiers too. I don't ever want Canada to be like that. We had a platoon rotating out at Police District 5, known as PD5, and they were there on an observation to protect the police from terrorist attacks, which obviously included them observing in all directions. But the walls of the police headquarters in that area overlooked some civilian yards, and I recall hearing that there was a husband who would beat his wife because our guys could see her hanging laundry in the backyard. He finally came over and told them not to look that way anymore, or he'd have to keep beating her. So they relented and stopped watching for threats in that direction. I don't ever want Canada to be like that. I also remember being on patrol, hanging out the roof hatch of a Lav 3 one afternoon and passing a few women in their light blue burqas. Well, they looked around and then suddenly flipped all those burqas up to expose their young, pretty faces, giggling and smiling and waving at us. It was exciting for them because they knew what they were doing was wrong. They weren't wearing those full-body coverings based on their own beliefs or desire to follow a specific interpretation of the Quran. They were made to do so. That's not freedom. That's oppression. I don't ever want Canada to be like that. My last story is the most horrible to me. One of the objectives during our tour was to maintain stability so President Karzai's people could have their Loya Jirga, a parliamentary meeting of sorts, attended by representatives from all over the nation. I wasn't able to find any articles detailing what happened, but I didn't expect to. But the PDF I've included captures the atmosphere quite well. In any case, I heard by word of mouth that at some point there was a disagreement with some of the more radical men, and they ended up physically assaulting the female representatives they disagreed with. I don't ever want Canada to be like that.
What is actually happening is, to put it very quickly, Justin Trudeau is riding the elephant in the room, which is the Islamists, and Mr. Scheer and his people are running away, terrified by the Islamists, or by the elephant in the room, and won't touch it, won't talk about it. And the disallowance of my candidacy was a cave-in to the elephant in the room.
Salim suspects the Liberal Party is a full-fledged partner with the Islamists, while the CPC finds itself in a state of submission to those same Islamists. This may very well be true. The PPC will engage in this most important conversation, and they're the only ones. Maxime Bernier tweets he'll speak out, but other parties won't. What about the returning ISIS fighters Trudeau thinks should be rehabilitated and brought back into society after some prison time?
Like, for heaven's sake, sir, please be the Prime Minister.
Yeah. They decided to fight against Western civilization values
Yes.
and against Canadian values. That's their decision. They were not children, adults, and now they must deal with the consequences of that and stay outside our country. That's it.
In another interview, a Baptist minister, an immigrant himself, asks Maxime Bernier about these returning ISIS fighters.
And also in that same line, ISIS fighters that want to return, whose ideology specifically is anti-freedom. I mean, they say it openly. That scares even other Muslims.
Yeah.
How would you address that?
They must stay there. You know, these people, we must not bring back these people. And if the government is doing that, they must be judged. And so for me, that must not be the priority of the government to try to bring back these people in Canada. And I won't do anything for that as a politician to try to bring them back. They decided to fight against our civilization, against our values. And they decided to work with a terrorist organization. So it is a crime under the criminal code, and so that's not a priority for the government to bring them back. So for me, the position on that is they must stay over there where they are right now, and that's it.
One of the things that has happened, and again, the media hasn't talked about it and won't talk about it except for Rex and Lori, is that not only the CPC leadership disallowed me for reasons that we can speculate, but they sent a message out to the new generation of Muslims who were born in Canada and who were growing up, that, you know, if you are in the ways of thinking and going in the direction of Salim and people like him, then you have no place in our party. You have no place in this country. The Liberal Party is not going to embrace them. The CP is not now saying that we are not going to embrace them. NDP and Green is out of the way. So where are the more ambitious young people, men and women, going to go? They're going to gravitate towards those very institutions. They are feeding the Muslim Brotherhood agenda.
Tom Quiggin concludes that the Conservative Party is not at all conservative. I've included that Liberal MPs are also a part of this to show, dear friends, that both parties are corrupt beyond imagination. It's also possible that the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, is more than empathetic with the Khalistani Sikh separatist movement mentioned in the leaked PDF from Tom Quiggin, as he was at one point videotaped with some of them. Complicated as it is, that movement certainly involved militancy at different points. And who will ever forget Green Party leader Elizabeth May's inebriated swooning over terrorist Omar Khadr being released from Guantanamo?
Omar Khadr, you got more class than the whole cabinet. Thank you.
The narrative that he was an innocent, brainwashed little boy is politically correct fluff meant to sway the masses. By 15, he had been well radicalized by his father, and while living in Afghanistan, he'd killed an American medic named Chris Spear with a grenade when where they were living was raided by U.S. military. One of his release conditions was that he could not see his sister, someone who's thought to be quite radical herself, even potentially involved with Al-Qaeda at one point, without supervision. His release was in part thanks to his having disavowed his radical past, which makes one wonder, why would he want anything to do with his Islamist sister? The point is, in light of this video discussion, these are the four major political parties we traditionally get to select our government from.
If you were to be in a leadership role, if you were to become prime minister, what sort of directions do you give to your public safety minister?
Transparency.
Do you think the country
Tell the truth. Transparency. I think people are able to deal with that. They are able to deal with the truth. Tell them the truth and we'll deal with it. That's it. Yeah.
Every federal election is important. Yet, in retrospect, some are more important and more critical than others in the life of a country such as ours.
Right now, on the trajectory we're headed down with both major parties, within 1 to 2 terms or 4 to 10 years, we're going to see the strategy of silencing all who oppose radical Islamism fall into place thanks to the false labeling of Islamophobia, just as has already happened to the United Kingdom. In fact, in reports about the awful Danforth shooting in 2018, the possibility that the shooter was radicalized was scrubbed clean everywhere you look, as can be witnessed in these major news articles. It wasn't until days later that a CBC opinion piece implied that his pardoning a brown-skinned man with the words, "Don't worry, I'm not going to shoot you," were connected with the possibility that this was an Islamist attack. The man, identified as Jaspal Singh, was actually a Sikh man. Finally, months later, and then a year after, enough had trickled out from Toronto police that we know the shooter was hollering Allah Akbar. But as usual, this had nothing to do with Islam, because our officials and our media are clueless to the necessity that we must openly differentiate Islam from Islamism, so we can properly tackle the issue while informing people, which creates informed voters. But no, this was just another young man suffering from mental illness. Well, I'm sorry, friends, but in our modern age where so many are suffering from existential crisis, that is, to feel they have no meaning in life, radical Islamism is going to be what some gravitate to, and that is a fact. We must be willing to discuss this. Not long ago in the UK, a massive rape gang and grooming operation run by Islamists was covered up by the British police by order of the government, as to not ruffle any feathers or cause distrust in the populace, I suppose. This is all censorship and unwarranted government overreach by the nanny state that doesn't have any faith in its citizens to think for themselves, and such thought policing is making all matters worse. If we do not correct this course, our children and grandchildren will either be totally subdued, living complacently under tyranny of a government inundated by and under the thumb of radical Islamists who've completely manipulated them, or, if they have the courage, which the systematic implementation of entertainment and distraction and pacification unto lethargy is working to eliminate, they will be fighting an armed revolution to have freedom, a freedom we could have peaceably fought for them now through speech and a ballot box. Thankfully, my fellow Canadians, we do have an option, a party, and a leader that is willing to say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done to protect all Canadians, regardless of where we originally came from or how many generations our families have been here, from this very real threat that is being invited in by our two main establishment parties. Please like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of future videos in this series. All sources used have links in the description below, and all compatible videos can also be found in a playlist within this channel, link below. The complete list of videos in this series for the upcoming election can be found at canadiansforppc.blogspot.com. You can also follow Maxime Bernier on social media via these different platforms. Check out the official PPC website at peoplespartyofcanada.ca. If you want to support the party, you can volunteer with your local candidate and EDA or Electoral District Association and donate directly to them if able. Going door to door with this information and training other concerned Canadians to do likewise will be most beneficial, as this is a genuine grassroots movement. And if you believe in the power of prayer, please do be praying for our leaders and our nation. Thank you, and God bless Canada.